The world has watched a man who seemingly lives behind a kaleidoscope of masks. We saw the rogue pirate, the scissor-handed outcast, and the Mad Hatter, all painted in vibrant, eccentric strokes. But behind the heavy makeup and the tinted glasses of Johnny Depp lay a quiet, suffocating solitude that the flashbulbs never captured. He was the architect of fantasy for millions, yet his own reality was often a beautifully furnished cage of isolation. In the twilight of a career that has seen the highest peaks of Hollywood stardom and the deepest valleys of personal scrutiny, he made a choice that stunned the industry. After a period of exile where the noise of courthouses drowned out the memory of his artistry, he did not return with a loud, explosion-filled blockbuster or a reprisal of his most famous, swaggering pirate. Instead, he quietly stepped into the powdered wig and velvet robes of King Louis XV in the film Jean du Barry. It was a move that defied every expectation of a traditional Hollywood comeback, signaling a shift from the erratic energy of his past to a profound stillness that spoke volumes about his current state of mind. The audience, conditioned to expect the frantic, kinetic energy that defined his most commercially successful years, was greeted with something entirely different. In Jean du Barry, he stripped away the prosthetics, the funny walks, and the rapid-fire dialogue. Performing entirely in French, a language that is not his mother tongue, he relied almost exclusively on the subtle architecture of his face. It was a performance built on micro-expressions, a heavy-lidded gaze, a slight twitch of the mouth, a weary slump of the shoulders. He portrayed a monarch who was bored with the pageantry of his own court, a man who possessed absolute power but found no joy in it until he met a commoner who saw him simply as a man. This role required a vulnerability that he had rarely shown since his earliest days in independent cinema. The brilliance of the performance lay in its restraint. For an actor known for going big, the choice to go small was a revelation. He allowed the camera to linger on his stillness, inviting the viewer to project their own interpretations onto the king's melancholy. When he walks through the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, there is a ghostly quality to his movement, as if he is already haunting the palace he rules. It was a haunting parallel to his own life, a man surrounded by sycophants and spectacle, yearning for something real, something that didn't require a script. The reception at the Cannes Film Festival solidified the impact of this artistic pivot. When the credits rolled and the lights came up, the 7-minute standing ovation was not just for the film, but for the survival of the artist. Cameras caught him wiping away tears, a rare crack in the stoic composure he usually maintains. It was a moment where the character and the actor merged, the aging king facing his mortality and the aging icon facing his legacy. Critics who had sharpened their knives expecting a disaster were forced to acknowledge the undeniable screen presence that remained intact. He commanded the frame not with theatrics, but with a gravity that only comes from enduring real-world storms. What made this specific role a masterpiece of his later years was the subtext of the final act. As King Louis XV descends into illness and death, the performance becomes excruciatingly intimate. The fear in his eyes, stripped of royal pretense, mirrored the universal human fear of the end. He played the physical decay with a dignity that was heartbreaking to watch. It was a far cry from the invincible heroes he once played. By choosing to portray a dying king, he was symbolically killing off the invincible movie star persona, presenting himself to the audience as mortal, flawed, and deeply human. It was a declaration that he was no longer interested in being a commodity for mass consumption, but an artist interested in the truth of the human condition. This performance in Jean du Barry served as a quiet rebellion against the industry that had turned its back on him. Hollywood likely expected him to fight for his relevance with noise. Instead, he commanded attention with silence. He proved that he did not need the safety net of a major studio franchise to captivate an audience. He only needed his craft. The film stands as a testament to his ability to reinvent himself, not by adding more layers to the disguise, but by peeling them away until only the raw, unvarnished emotion remained. It was a reminder that before the fame, before the scandals, and before the blockbusters, there was simply an actor who loved the art of storytelling, and in the quiet halls of Versailles, he found that love again. To understand the true weight of his performance in Jean du Barry, we must look beyond the screen and into the mirror it holds up to his own existence. This role was not merely a historical reenactment, it was a psychological exorcism. King Louis XV was a man defined by the protocols that suffocated him, a figure who lived his entire life being watched, dissected, and discussed by a court that cared little for his humanity. It is impossible to ignore the parallel to the actor's own life in the modern court of public opinion. For decades, he has lived inside a gilded cage where every romantic partner, every financial decision, and every misstep is broadcast for global consumption. In playing a king who found solace only in the quiet company of one woman who ignored his title, he was channeling a profound yearning for a life where he could simply be, rather than be perceived. The film explores the crushing weight of aging in a world that fetishizes youth and vitality. We watched him for years as the eternal boy man, the Peter Pan of Hollywood who refused to grow up. But in this film, the heavy makeup and eccentric costumes are gone, replaced by the undeniable reality of wrinkled skin and a slower gait. By embracing the physical decline of the king, he confronted the one adversary no amount of charisma can defeat: time. This resonance hits the audience on a subconscious level. We are seeing a man who has spent his life running, from his past, from boredom, from reality, finally stop running and sit with the silence. The performance argues that true power isn't about controlling a kingdom or a box office. It is about maintaining one's dignity when the world expects you to crumble. Furthermore, the silence of the character speaks to a deeper emotional truth about the cost of a life lived in the spotlight. In the film, the king's words are few because his words have always been twisted or used against him by courtiers vying for favor. This mirrors the actor's recent years, where his private texts and recorded arguments were dissected in a court of law. His choice to play a man of few words is a reclamation of his voice. It suggests that after years of noise, accusations, and chaotic headlines, the only honest response is silence. It is a performance of subtraction, where he removed the celebrity ego to reveal the exhausted soul beneath. It forces the viewer to lean in, to look for the truth in his eyes rather than his dialogue, creating an intimacy that is both uncomfortable and deeply moving. But while the slow decay of a king on screen was a controlled artistic choice, he once faced a moment of terror where control was entirely stripped away, not on a movie set, but thousands of feet in the air. It was a scenario that reads like the script of a disaster movie, yet it was terrifyingly real. He was aboard a private Gulfstream jet, flying with director Bruce Robinson. They were suspended in the luxury of the upper atmosphere, the world below nothing but a distant abstraction, when the hum of the engines, a sound so constant you forget it's there, suddenly vanished. The silence that followed was not the peaceful silence of Versailles. It was the violent, heavy silence of impending death. The plane's engines had shut down completely. The artificial environment of the pressurized cabin, usually a sanctuary of champagne and comfort, instantly transformed into a metal coffin plummeting toward the earth. He described the sensation as a physical weightlessness, a suspension in time where the brain struggles to comprehend that the narrative of one's life is about to be cut short by a mechanical failure. The roar of the wind outside began to scream against the fuselage as the aircraft banked and descended, gravity reclaiming them with a terrifying indifference. In those agonizing seconds, which must have felt like hours, the veneer of the movie star evaporated. There were no cameras to capture a heroic last stand, no stunt coordinators to rig a safety wire. He looked at Robinson, And in the face of absolute annihilation, a strange, hysterical reaction took over. They didn't scream or bargain with God, they burst into laughter. It was the laughter of absurdity, the realization of how fragile and ridiculous the human ego is when pitted against the laws of physics. They were two men who had spent their lives crafting fiction, now confronted with the ultimate, unscripted reality. The plane was falling, the ocean was rushing up to meet them, and in that confined space, the terrifying truth of mortality crashed down harder than the aircraft itself. Then, just as suddenly as they had failed, the engines roared back to life, catching them before the end, leaving them shaking, alive, and forever changed by the silence that nearly took them. When the landing gear finally screeched against the tarmac, the sound was not a mechanical noise, but the sudden, violent return of a future that had been canceled only moments before. Walking away from that aircraft, he didn't just step back onto solid ground. He stepped into a different reality. The near-death experience aboard that private jet stripped away the insulation that fame provides. In Hollywood, a star of his magnitude is protected from almost everything: bad reviews, financial ruin, legal consequences. But the atmosphere does not care about box office receipts. That brush with oblivion instilled a profound, jarring humility that no amount of public adoration could ever replicate. He realized that the courage he displayed on screen, swinging from rigging on a pirate ship or facing down cinematic villains, was nothing more than choreography. Real courage, he discovered, was the ability to look at the end of your life and simply accept the absurdity of it all without screaming. This event fundamentally altered the way he viewed his time on Earth. The cool persona that had become his trademark, the sunglasses, the scarves, the aloof demeanor, was revealed to be just another costume. Underneath it, he was as fragile as anyone else. He began to speak about life with a kind of poetic fatalism, a recognition that every moment is borrowed time. The frantic pace of his career, the desperate need to please everyone, began to seem trivial compared to the simple, terrifying miracle of breathing. It shifted his focus from the pursuit of immortality through film to the appreciation of the fleeting, messy present. He understood that the legacy he was so carefully building could be erased in a second by a faulty engine part, and this realization brought a strange, dark comfort. It liberated him from the pressure of perfection. The aftermath of the flight didn't turn him into a saint, but it did make him more attuned to the fragility of those around him. He became more obsessed with capturing moments, documenting his life through paintings and journals, trying to leave a mark that was more personal than a celluloid image. The hysterical laughter he shared with Robinson as the plane fell became a metaphor for his entire worldview. When the world is crashing down around you, when the narrative spins out of control, sometimes the only sane response is to laugh at the chaos. It was a lesson in surrender. He stopped trying to steer the plane of his public perception with such a white-knuckled grip, eventually allowing the turbulence of his personal life to buffet him without breaking him. He had looked into the void, and the void had laughed back. To understand why he built a life playing characters who hide behind masks, we must travel back long before the private jets and the Hollywood hills to the dusty, sun-baked reality of his childhood in Kentucky and Florida. Before he was a heartthrob, he was a lonely boy moving through a world that felt perpetually unsafe. While the public knows the stories of his eccentricity, few understand the specific, formative tragedy that ruptured his foundation: the loss of the only safe harbor he had known. As a young child, his grandfather, Walter Everett Palmer, known affectionately as Paw Paw, was his universe. In a home life defined by the volatility of his mother, a woman he later described with a mix of love and terror as on the march, Paw Paw was the stillness. He was the gentle quiet in a house full of screaming, the one person who saw the sensitive boy beneath the anxiety. Then, when he was just 7 years old, that safety was ripped away. Paw Paw died, and with him went the only stability the boy had ever known. The loss was cataclysmic. It wasn't just a death, it was an eviction from emotional security. Following the funeral, the family began a nomadic existence, moving dozens of times between motel rooms and rental houses, running from debts and demons. The void left by his grandfather created a massive howling silence in his life that he didn't know how to fill. Without his anchor, he was left alone, with a mother whose moods were as unpredictable as the weather, often violent and cruel. The unfinished business of this loss was the sudden realization that love does not guarantee safety, and that the people you need the most can vanish without warning. This trauma birthed the artist. Unable to find comfort in his own skin or his own home, he began to inhabit others. He locked himself in his room, practicing guitar until his fingers bled, not to become a rock star, but to drown out the noise of the house. He started mimicking voices, mannerisms, and walking styles, creating buffers between his true self and a world that had hurt him. He wasn't trying to be an actor, he was trying to be anyone but himself. The eccentric characters he would later become famous for, Edward Scissorhands, Willy Wonka, Jack Sparrow, were all rooted in this terrified little boy who lost his protector. They are all outcasts, all slightly broken, all hiding a deep sadness behind a strange exterior. He spent his career building the kind of fantastical, protective worlds on screen that he was denied in his own childhood, trying to recapture the feeling of safety he lost the day his grandfather died. Long before he was the face of billion-dollar franchises, he was just another hungry ghost haunting the boulevards of Los Angeles, a dropout with a guitar case full of dreams and pockets full of lint. He arrived in Hollywood not with the ambition to be a movie star, but with the desperate hope of keeping his band, the Kids, alive. The reality he encountered was not the glamour of the silver screen, but the gritty, crushing poverty of the starving artist. He lived in a cheap motel on Hollywood Boulevard, a place where the neon signs buzzed louder than the air conditioning, and the carpet smelled of stale smoke and broken promises. He was surviving on little more than nicotine and adrenaline, navigating a city that chews up dreamers and spits them out on the sidewalk. During these struggle years, the rejection was constant and humiliating. He wasn't fighting for roles, he was fighting for rent. In one of the most ironic twists of his life, his first acting job wasn't on a stage or a set, but in a cubicle. He worked as a telemarketer selling personalized ballpoint pens. It was a soul-crushing exercise in deception. He had to call strangers, adopt a fake persona, and convince them to buy something they didn't need. He would put on his best, serious businessman voice, promising them that these pens would change their lives, all while sitting in a cramped office, wondering where his next meal was coming from. It was here, in the drudgery of cold calling, that he essentially learned to act. He learned that if you commit to the lie with enough conviction, people will believe you. But the music career stalled, the band broke up, and he was left adrift. He was literally filling out job applications for grocery stores and mechanics when fate intervened in the form of an old friend, Nicolas Cage. Cage saw something in him, a manic energy, a unique look, and suggested he try acting. He resisted. He saw actors as pretty boys, not artists. But desperation has a way of changing a man's principles. He walked into reading after reading, often looking disheveled, anxious, and entirely uninterested in the process. Yet, it was this very lack of desperation to please that made him magnetic. Casting directors were used to young men begging for approval. He simply didn't care. He stumbled into his first role in A Nightmare on Elm Street, not because he had trained for years, but because the director's daughter thought he was beautiful. It was a lucky break, but it didn't end the struggle. He spent years fighting against the teen idol box the industry tried to shove him into, a struggle that was arguably more painful than the poverty itself. He was a character actor trapped in a leading man's body, a punk rocker forced to wear the mask of a heartthrob, suffocating under the weight of a fame he never actually asked for. As his career progressed, a specific trait emerged that would become his signature, though initially it terrified the executives who signed his paychecks: his absolute refusal to play a character straight. While Hollywood was built on the backs of stoic, predictable leading men who saved the day with a square jaw and a clear voice, he insisted on slurring his words, staggering his walk, and hiding behind layers of bizarre affectations. He didn't want the audience to look at him. He wanted them to look at the creature he had built. This instinct to hide in plain sight culminated in the creation of his most iconic role, Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl. When he first stepped onto the set, adorned with gold teeth, heavy eyeliner, and swaying as if he were perpetually heat-stricken or drunk, the studio executives panicked. They didn't see a genius choice. They saw a disaster. High-ranking officials at Disney were reportedly losing sleep, calling the director in a rage, asking, "What is he doing? Is he drunk? Is he gay?" They couldn't understand the mumbling, the erratic hand gestures, the rock star swagger that channeled Keith Richards rather than Errol Flynn. They wanted a hero. He gave them a trickster. There was immense pressure to tone it down, to remove the gold teeth, to speak clearly, to be the Disney prince they had paid for. They threatened to fire him, believing he was single-handedly ruining a massive investment, but he dug his heels in. In a display of artistic stubbornness that would define his legacy, he told the studio that if they didn't like his choices, they would have to fire him. He knew something they didn't. He understood that the audience didn't want another perfect hero. They wanted someone flawed, unpredictable, and delightfully strange. He bet his entire reputation on that slur and that swagger. When the film was released, the very trait the studio hated, his eccentricity, became the reason the world fell in love. He turned a generic pirate role into a cultural phenomenon, proving that his instincts were sharper than the focus groups. He taught the industry that a character's flaws are more interesting than their virtues, and that sometimes the only way to be truly seen is to wear the wildest mask you can find. Johnny Depp remains one of the few true enigmas in an industry that now demands total, sanitized transparency. His legacy is not defined merely by the billions of dollars his films have grossed, but by the relentless courage to remain unfinished. He is a reminder that we are all collections of our broken pieces, glued together by the stories we tell ourselves to survive. Whether he is a pirate, a king, or simply a man playing guitar in the smoke of a small bar, he represents the triumph of the individual over the machine. He taught us that it is okay to be weird, to be damaged, and to be different, because it is often in our cracks that the light finally gets in. If this deep dive into the hidden battles and artistic triumphs of Johnny Depp resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with a fellow fan. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story about the legends who shape our world. Let us know in the comments, which of his many faces is your favorite? Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching.